Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that you own a shopping mall. Not a small neighborhood center, a real regional mall. Hundreds of thousands of square feet, dozens of stores, restaurants, parking lots, escalators, security guards, maintenance crews, and thousands of people walking through your property every single day. At first, it sounds like an incredible business. Because everywhere you look, people are spending money. Someone is buying a new phone. Someone is ordering dinner. Someone is buying a $2,000 handbag. Someone is buying a pair of sneakers. And you own the building where all of this is happening.
So naturally, you might think you are making a fortune. But there is a problem. Almost none of that money belongs to you. The customer buys the handbag. The retailer gets the revenue. The restaurant gets the money from the meal. The shoe store gets paid for the shoes. You don't. Your business is something much more interesting. You own the machine that gives those businesses access to customers. You own the location, the space, the parking, the infrastructure, and most importantly, the traffic. And that machine can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But it can also destroy a fortune. Because a shopping mall can be full of stores, full of people, and still lose money. So the real question isn't, how much money do people spend inside a mall? The real question is, how much money can the owner actually keep? And if you had $500 million, would buying a shopping mall make you rich? Or would you be buying one of the most expensive liabilities in retail? Let's find out.
Let's start with the obvious question. How much does it cost to own a shopping mall? The frustrating answer is, it depends. A struggling mall can be worth dramatically less than a premium property in a major market. Location matters, tenant quality matters, occupancy matters, retailer sales matter, and the age of the building matters. And the most important factor of all is cash flow. Commercial real estate investors often look at something called a capitalization rate, or simply a cap rate. The idea is surprisingly simple. Take the property's annual net operating income and divide it by the property's value. Imagine you find a mall producing $40 million in annual net operating income. Now imagine investors are willing to accept an 8% capitalization rate. 40 million divided by 8% gives you a value of roughly $500 million. That means you're not really buying a giant building for $500 million. You're buying the expectation that this property can continue producing roughly $40 million of operating income every year. And now we get to the part that makes commercial real estate so powerful. You may not have to put up all $500 million yourself. A property like this can potentially be financed with a large amount of debt. So imagine this. The mall costs $500 million. You finance $325 million with debt. And you put in $175 million of your own equity. Suddenly, you don't own a $500 million asset with $500 million of your money. You control a $500 million asset with $175 million of equity. That sounds fantastic. Until you remember one thing. The mall's income can fall. The debt payment doesn't simply disappear. And that creates the first great secret of this business. You aren't really buying a building. You're buying a stream of future cash flows. And if that stream breaks, the building itself may not save you. Now, imagine you actually own the mall. It's 6 in the morning. The stores are closed, but your business is already operating. Cleaning crews are moving through the building. Security guards are beginning their shifts. Maintenance teams are checking mechanical systems. Delivery trucks are arriving. The HVAC systems are running. The parking lot lights are still on. And somewhere inside the building, hundreds of pieces of equipment are doing exactly what they are supposed to do. Later, the doors open. Employees arrive. Restaurants begin preparing food. Retailers turn on their displays. And then, the customers arrive. But here's the important part. You are not selling them anything. You're making it possible for everyone else to sell to them. Think about what a retailer actually needs. It needs a location. It needs parking. It needs visibility. It needs security. It needs lighting. It needs heating and air conditioning. It needs bathrooms. It needs a functioning building. And above all, it needs customers. The mall owner provides that environment. The retailer provides the products. And the retailer pays the mall owner for access. That payment normally starts with rent, but it can go much further. Mall owners can also collect reimbursements for common area expenses, property taxes, utilities, marketing, and in some lease structures, a portion of rent can be connected to retailer sales. This is why a mall is not really one business. It's hundreds of financial relationships, all operating inside the same building. Every storefront is a contract. Every lease renewal is a negotiation. Every empty unit is a potential loss. Every successful retailer can make the property stronger. And suddenly, the mall stops looking like a building. It starts looking like a giant financial machine. But there is one number that matters more than almost anything else: traffic. Because if people stop coming, the entire machine starts to weaken.
This is where the economics get interesting. Imagine you own 1,000,000 square feet of shopping space. You don't need every customer to buy something from you. You don't even need to own the stores. You simply need businesses to believe that your location is valuable enough to pay for. That is the real business. You're monetizing space and attention. A customer walks into the mall. That customer creates an opportunity for a retailer. The retailer generates sales. The retailer pays rent. And that rent becomes part of your property's income. It's a simple chain, but at scale, it becomes enormous. And this is where successful mall owners become much more sophisticated than simple landlords.
They don't just ask, "What rent can I charge?" They ask, "What combination of tenants makes this entire property more valuable?" Because a mall is an ecosystem. A luxury retailer can attract a certain type of customer. A grocery store can generate frequent visits. A cinema can keep people there for hours. Restaurants can extend the visit. Entertainment can bring families. And a major anchor tenant can generate traffic for everyone around it. So imagine you have two possible tenants. One will pay you $1 million a year, but the store barely attracts anyone. The second will pay you $800,000, but it becomes one of the busiest stores in the mall. Which one do you want? The answer isn't always obvious, because the second tenant may generate more value for the entire property. More customers, more traffic, more sales, more demand from other retailers, and potentially higher rents in the future.
That is why the best mall owners aren't simply collecting rent. They are managing an ecosystem. And some of the biggest mall operators in America show exactly how powerful that model can become. Simon Property Group reported that its U.S. malls and premium outlets were 96.4% occupied at the end of 2025. Average base minimum rent was about $60.97 per square foot, and reported retailer sales reached $799 per square foot over the trailing 12 months. Portfolio net operating income increased 4.7% during 2025. Those numbers describe an extremely strong portfolio. But here's the problem. Revenue is only one side of the equation, because every mall has another machine running underneath it: the expense machine. Walk through a beautiful shopping mall, and most people see stores.
and owner sees costs. Security, cleaning, lighting, heating, air conditioning, escalators, elevators, parking, landscaping, insurance, property taxes, repairs, management, marketing, and then capital expenditures. Because a giant building doesn't stay modern by accident. Roofs need replacing, parking lots need resurfacing, bathrooms need renovation, air conditioning systems need upgrades, storefronts need redesigning.
And retailers often demand improvements to their spaces before signing new leases. This is the part most people never think about. The mall has to keep spending money, even when customers aren't spending money. And then there is another bill, debt. Go back to our hypothetical property, a $500 million mall. Suppose you financed it with $325 million of debt. Now imagine an average interest cost of 5%. That would mean about $16.25 million a year in interest alone. Our mall produces $40 million in annual NOI, but that doesn't mean you have $40 million sitting in your bank account. You still have financing costs, you still have capital requirements, you still have ownership level expenses, and you still need to keep the property competitive. So the cash flow gets divided before it ever reaches you. This is why sophisticated real estate investors focus on NOI, not just revenue. The mall might generate enormous amounts of economic activity, but what matters to the owner is what remains after the property operates. And there's something else that can destroy the calculation: a tenant leaving.
Imagine one of your biggest stores closes. The space becomes empty. Customers have less reason to visit that part of the mall. Other retailers notice. Foot traffic falls. Potential new tenants demand lower rent. And suddenly, one empty store creates problems far beyond its own walls. That is why mall ownership is so different from owning a simple apartment building. You're not just renting space, you're trying to keep an entire ecosystem alive. And now, we get to the people who figured out how to do exactly that.
The strongest mall operators understood something important. People don't necessarily visit a mall because they need a pair of shoes. They visit because they have a reason to be there. That distinction changes everything. Take Mall of America. The property isn't simply a collection of retail stores. It combines shopping with restaurants, attractions, and entertainment. It has more than 500 stores, dozens of dining options, a massive indoor theme park, an aquarium, and a huge calendar of events. The result is something much more powerful than a traditional shopping center. It's a destination. And that's the direction the strongest malls have been moving toward. Because if you're competing with online shopping, you can't simply ask people to leave their homes to buy something they can order in 30 seconds. You need to give them a reason to visit.
Maybe it's entertainment. Maybe it's food. Maybe it's a family experience. Maybe it's an event. Maybe it's a service. Maybe it's simply the feeling of being somewhere. And this creates a powerful economic effect. The longer people stay, the more opportunities retailers have to make sales. Restaurants get more customers. Entertainment gets more customers. Stores get more traffic, and the property becomes more valuable. The mall starts becoming less about shopping and more about experience. That may be one of the biggest opportunities in the entire industry. But there is another side to this story, because some owners learned what happens when that experience disappears. And when the numbers stop working, all the beautiful architecture in the world can't save you.
In 2021, Washington Prime Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. At the time, the company had roughly $4 billion in assets and around $3.5 billion in debt. The company operated a massive portfolio of shopping centers. But the pandemic created a devastating combination. Foot traffic collapsed, retailers were under enormous pressure. Rent collections became a problem, and a highly leveraged business suddenly had much less cash coming in. The important lesson is not simply that the pandemic hurt malls. The deeper lesson is this. The buildings didn't disappear. The debt didn't disappear. The operating costs didn't disappear. What disappeared was the economic activity that supported them.
That is the nightmare scenario for any mall owner. Because leverage magnifies both sides of the equation. When business is strong, debt can increase your return on equity. But when business collapses, the same debt can destroy your equity. Imagine your property produces enough cash to comfortably support its financing. Everything looks fine. Then occupancy falls. A major tenant goes bankrupt. Another retailer leaves. Your revenue falls. Your expenses don't fall at the same speed. And your lender still expects to be paid. That is how a property that once looked like a billion-dollar asset can become a financial problem. And this is why the most dangerous mall isn't necessarily the emptiest one.
It can be the one with too much debt, because an asset doesn't have to be worthless to ruin its owner. It only has to produce less cash than the financing structure requires. And now we reach the biggest question. What could actually destroy the shopping mall business? For years, people assumed the biggest threat to malls was e-commerce. And obviously, online shopping changed retail forever. But e-commerce itself isn't the entire story. The deeper threat is irrelevance. A mall becomes vulnerable when people stop having a reason to visit. And once that happens, a dangerous cycle can begin. Lower traffic, lower retailer sales, weaker tenants, store closures, more empty space, even lower traffic, then more closures. And suddenly, the mall is fighting against itself. This is why vacancy can be so dangerous. An empty store isn't just an empty room. It can damage the experience of the entire property. But here's the surprising part.
The strongest owners can turn this threat into an opportunity. Because a retail box doesn't have to remain a retail box forever. A former department store can become entertainment. An empty wing can become restaurants. A large parking area can become redevelopment. Unused space can potentially become hotels, apartments, offices, medical facilities, or mixed-use developments. And that changes the question completely. The future value of a mall may not depend only on what is inside it today. It may depend on what the owner can build there tomorrow. That's the real advantage of owning prime real estate. The building is only one possible use. The land, the location, the traffic, and the surrounding population can be worth much more. But to understand whether this actually makes sense, we need to go back to our $500 million mall and do the calculation.
Let's assume our hypothetical mall costs $500 million. We assume it produces $40 million of annual net operating income, and we assume the property is financed with $325 million of debt. That leaves $175 million of equity. Now assume a hypothetical 5% interest rate. That's roughly $16.25 million in annual interest. So start with $40 million of NOI. Subtract $16.25 million of interest. You're left with roughly $23.75 million. But remember, this is not automatically your personal profit. You still need to think about principal repayment, capital expenditures, major renovations, ownership expenses, future leasing costs, unexpected repairs, and the risk that NOI itself changes. Now imagine the mall gets stronger, occupancy rises, rents increase, retailer sales improve, the property becomes more valuable. That is the dream. But now imagine the opposite. Occupancy falls, a major anchor tenant leaves, another retailer files for bankruptcy, traffic declines, and NOI falls from $40 million to $30 million, then to $20 million.
The debt didn't fall with it. The building didn't become cheaper to operate.
The roof didn't suddenly become free. The security company didn't stop sending invoices. And that's the problem. The real calculation isn't how much revenue does the mall generate. It's how resilient is that revenue? Because the value of a mall isn't based only on what it earns today. It depends on whether you believe it can keep earning tomorrow, and 10 years from now, and 20 years from now. That is what you're actually buying. A future.
So, would I buy a shopping mall? If you handed me $500 million? Probably not. At least not just because the mall is beautiful, not because the parking lot is full, and not because people are spending millions of dollars inside. I would only buy it if I believed the property could remain relevant. My investment score would be 6 out of 10. The right property can be incredibly valuable, but the wrong one can become a financial disaster. Risk score, 8 out of 10. Because you're exposed to retailers, consumers, interest rates, local economic conditions, and the future of the property itself. Difficulty score, 9 out of 10. You're not just managing real estate, you're managing hundreds of businesses, millions of square feet, thousands of customers, and an ecosystem that has to keep working.
Profit score, 8 out of 10. Because when everything works, the economics can be extremely powerful. But here's the final verdict. I wouldn't buy a shopping mall because people are shopping there today. I would buy one only if I believed people would still have a reason to come there 10 years from now. Because the greatest asset inside a mall isn't the stores, it isn't the escalators, it isn't the parking lot, and it isn't even the building. It's the traffic, the people, the attention, the reason to visit. Because the mall isn't really the business, the people are. And if you can keep them coming, you may own one of the most powerful real estate machines in the world. But if you lose them, you don't own a money machine anymore. You own a very large building with a very large bill. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. A special thank you to those who stayed tuned until the very end. You've been watching the Terra Economics channel. Good luck and much success in your business endeavors.